Professor Dershowitz, last time we spoke, it was just before the trial. We know since then, obviously, Ghislaine was given a guilty verdict. What are your thoughts on how that trial was conducted?
Well, the most important aspect of that trial is it was Hamlet without the prince. That is, the person who had accused Ghislaine Maxwell, who had started the investigation, was Virginia Giuffre, who claimed that this all began by Ghislaine Maxwell meeting her at the Mar-a-Lago and introducing her to Epstein. And there was an empty chair at the trial. Virginia Giuffre was not called by the government. It's obvious why. The government simply didn't believe she was capable of telling the truth. The government understood she had deep, deep credibility issues, that she had lied about her age, that she was 14 when she first met Epstein, she was 17. She lied about meeting Al Gore and Tipper Gore and Jeffrey Epstein's island. The Gores never met Epstein, didn't know them. She lied about me. She lied about Prince Andrew. She lied about people like Senator Mitchell, Ambassador Richardson, and many, many other people, Ehud Barak. And so the government just simply didn't believe her, didn't think she was credible. And they knew if they put her on the witness stand, their case would fall because the jury would say, gee, if they have to use a witness like that, who so obviously has a history of lying, they don't have a strong enough case. The second reason was that the government's own prime witness, a girl named Carol Lynn, when she was 14 years old, was trafficked to Jeffrey Epstein by Virginia Giuffre. Virginia Giuffre was 18 or 19. She met Carolyn when she was 13 or 14. She groomed her, she befriended her. And then this 18 or 19-year-old Virginia Giuffre sold her basically to Jeffrey Epstein, trafficked her to Jeffrey Epstein, picked her up by a car from her apartment, got her in the car, told her to wear sexy clothes, told her if she's asked to lie about her age. And she then took her to Jeffrey Epstein's house. And right in front of this 14-year-old, Virginia Giuffre got naked and got on top of Jeffrey Epstein and had sex with him in order to induce her, the 14-year-old, to have sex with Epstein. That's a classic case of trafficking. Epstein didn't know about this girl, Caroline, so there was no reason. She wasn't compelled to bring her there. She did it to make money. She did it on her own, and she did it voluntarily. And Carolyn has now said that Virginia Giuffre is not under compulsion. She voluntarily did it. She became a trafficker. And so here's a woman who has spent her whole life making money on sex. She first made money from Jeffrey Epstein for having sex. She said she got $15,000 for having sex with Prince Andrew. Then she made money from Jeffrey Epstein for trafficking girls to him for sex. Now she's making between $6 and $10 million by accusing people of having sex with her. And so she would be the worst possible witness. And my belief is she would be a terrible witness against Prince Andrew as well. Certainly she'll be a terrible witness against me. I can prove categorically that she's lied about me over and over and over again. So for me, a very significant part of the Maxwell trial is what didn't happen. That is the empty chair, the fact that Virginia Giuffre was not called as a witness. And the government didn't believe her. Her own lawyers don't believe her. David Boies has told people and told me on tape that she was wrong, simply wrong. Her own lawyers don't believe her. The government doesn't believe her. Why should anybody believe her?
And you mentioned a tape. You also, and David Boies, you also have a tape recording of Boies mentioning quite a bit of a derogatory term relating to Jewish rabbis and insinuating a payoff, basically. Can you just...
Oh, it's not insinuating. 2 episodes. Number one, in front of a very distinguished person from Yale, David Boies said to me in front of witnesses, why don't you just get some rich Jewish rabbis to come up with $1 million and pay Virginia Giuffre and then she'll go away. And then we have a tape recording of me with David Boies in which he said if Jeffrey Epstein would just pay her a lot of money, she would go back to Australia not write a book, not say anything about Jeffrey Epstein. So clearly, she was seeking hush money. She wanted hush money. And she got paid probably lots of hush money. We know she's been paid over $6 million and probably closer to $10 million. And she wants to get even more. And so this is a witness that the United States government would never, ever use because they couldn't vouch for her credibility. And the real question is, why was she even considered as a witness? Why isn't she a defendant? Why wasn't she in the dock? She has committed the same crime that Maxwell was accused of committing. And in some respects worse, a 13, 14-year-old girl who she trained and brought to Jeffrey Epstein for money. And she was well above the age of consent when she did this. She was old enough to serve in the armed forces. She was old enough to sign a contract. She's old enough to be in America, under American law, charged with murder if she committed a murder and executed. She is an adult. And there's no evidence that she was compelled to bring Carolyn to Jeffrey Epstein to satisfy his sexual pleasures. She is a trafficker.
Well, we know that Virginia hasn't actually denied the fact. So she is on record as saying that she recruited children for Epstein. And we call them, they are children. And at a point when she was over the age of consent. We also know Carolyn has said that she wasn't coerced, that Virginia wasn't coerced. And we know that Carolyn has said that she doesn't deserve compensation from Prince Andrew. In other words, like you say, she was a sex trafficker. Why haven't the FBI or the police got involved? Why is she not, as you say, you say that, she should be. Why isn't she being?
Because everybody's terrified of being accused of somehow being unsympathetic to victims, of trying to silence victims. They've created a narrative which, if you have been a victim once in your life, and whether Virginia Giuffre was ever a victim will be decided at a trial. But if you've been a victim once, then you're immune from the law. You're above the law. You can engage in trafficking. You can engage in perjury. You can engage in extortion. She has participated in all of those, and yet she's not, as far as we know, being investigated. Neither are her lawyers. Her lawyers are part of this. We have a tape recording of Virginia's best friend since they're children, in which the best friend says, Virginia didn't want to mention me. She was pressured into doing it by her lawyers. And it's related to an attempt to get $1 billion from Leslie Wexner. This is all about the money. Follow the money, and you'll see where it ends up. It ends up with Virginia Giuffre making up stories. Now, look, I don't know what happened between her and Prince Andrew. I don't know whether there was just a photograph. I don't know whether they danced at the tramp. I don't know whether they went into a bathtub. I don't know whether they had sex. I wasn't there. I'm not here advocating for Prince Andrew. I'm just telling you one thing. Do not believe anything Virginia Giuffre says about anybody. Nothing should ever turn on the word of that serial perjurer and that trafficker and that woman who has based her whole life on earning money for sex. Let me again repeat it. She started her life by earning money by engaging in sex. Then she moved to becoming a trafficker, and she earned money for bringing young girls to Jeffrey Epstein. Then she earned money by falsely accusing people of having sex with her. She continues to do that. She has accused some of the most prominent men in the world of having sex with her. They have all denied it. Her own lawyer, Brad Edwards, said on television that she did not have sex with Leslie Wexner. She swore she had sex with Leslie Wexner between 5 and 10 times. Her own lawyers have said she was wrong, simply wrong in accusing me. That's on tape too. And yet there's no investigation. And the worst part of it is the media will not permit this side of the story to be told. BBC is criticized for even putting me on the air. I identified myself not as an objective constitutional scholar, but as a victim of Virginia Giuffre. I said she had accused me, and then I made my analysis based on that. But television station felt they had to apologize and explain why they had put me on the air. Well, they also had to apologize for even covering the issue and permitting the other side to be presented. And the public is denied the right to hear all sides. And that's just not consistent with democracy. And the BBC ought to be ashamed of itself for apologizing for presenting that side of the story and for allowing Ian Maxwell to also present. The same people who complained about me complained about Maxwell. Everybody knows that Maxwell is the brother and he doesn't come in an unbiased way. That's not what the news does. It doesn't only have unbiased experts. It has people who have an interest as long as it presents balance. And the BBC has presented victims, victims' lawyers, victims' advocates. Why shouldn't they present people who have been victimized by the alleged victims?
Well, we have, the BBC is supposed to be impartial. It's funded by the taxpayer. It has a mandate. It has to be impartial. And we are seeing that throughout this trial that they aren't being impartial, let's be honest. And you've experienced that with the media in general, haven't you? But let's go back to the accusations. The history of the accusations against you by Virginia are, the timeline. If people were allowed to hear the timeline, which they can now, they would seriously not just question it. I believe that they would believe that Virginia Giuffre is discredited because she began never mentioning you at all, did she? Until she received an email from Sharon Churcher from the Daily Mail suggesting that she include you into a book that she was actively seeking to sell and get an agent for. She mentioned your name. Even in that book, she didn't then mention that she had been assaulted by you, had sex with you in any way.
Or even met me. She said in the book, she never met me. She just once saw me. Let's remember this, that in the beginning, she speaks to the FBI. The FBI shows her pictures, including a picture of me. And she doesn't identify me as somebody she had sex with. She basically tells the FBI she did not have sex with Alan Dershowitz. Then she tells Sharon Churcher she did not have sex with Alan Dershowitz. And then Churcher writes her an email saying, but you ought to put Dershowitz in your book because he's famous. He represented Klaus von Bülow. He was in the movie Reversal of Fortune. It will help you sell your book to put Dershowitz in your book. So she puts me in the book, but as someone she did not have sex with. She said she had sex with George Mitchell, the former peacemaker in Northern Ireland. She said she had sex with Jacques Cousteau's granddaughter, Alexandra, who never met her. She said she had sex with a bunch of other people. Another Harvard professor named Stephen, I know who he is, but his name is under seal. She says all those things, but she says she did not have sex with Alan Dershowitz. And she makes a deliberate decision to commit perjury and submit a false affidavit, suddenly making up the story that she met me, she had sex with me, including in front of my house in Cambridge, including on an airplane with two women and in a car with two women, including in places I've never been since the time that she met Jeffrey Epstein, including in places I couldn't possibly have been during the relevant period of time. So she made up the entire story. She had a premeditated attack on me and my family. I am the victim of her perjury, her extortion plot, and her attempt to shake down people for money. She was using me in order to get to Leslie Wexner. The goal was very simple. The tactic was very simple. In the same week, she would accuse me publicly of having sex with her and destroy my reputation. And at the same time, she writes a secret letter through her lawyer to Leslie Wexner, the billionaire, saying, essentially, we have the same case against Leslie Wexner as we did against Alan Dershowitz. And here I'm putting words in their mouth, but this is the meaning of what they said. If you don't want to have happen to you what happened to Dershowitz, there are ways of resolving this by paying hush money. Yeah. That's what the goal was. It failed because I exposed it, but that was the goal. They made a different deal that will come out at the trial, but it was all part of an attempt to extort $1 billion from Leslie Wexner. And so this was not an accident. This was not a fantasy or a deliberation or delusion by a young woman. This was a 30-some-odd-year-old woman sitting down with her lawyers and plotting and planning to make money by destroying my reputation and attacking my integrity. And I will not remain silent in the face of that kind of victimization of an innocent man like me. I never had sex with an underage girl in my life. I never had sex with anybody I met through Jeffrey Epstein. And from the day I met Jeffrey Epstein, I have had sex with one woman in my life, my wife. I do not flirt. I do not touch. 50 years at Harvard, I was never accused of any sexual impropriety or any other kind of impropriety. And then she destroys my reputation simply in order to earn money. She ought to have to pay a very, very high price for that. And in prison.
Unfortunately for Virginia, you have records, don't you? You have evidence to defend yourself against her accusations. And since then, let's be honest, she's gone very quiet in the press about you. Your name is normally mentioned by journalists as a reference, i.e. Alan Dershowitz has also been accused by Virginia. We don't see her accusing you in the press as much. And she's also trying to avoid your lawsuit. You're currently trying to depose on it.
I could easily have made this thing just go away by simply issuing a statement saying, no, it was a mistake. She never met me, never had sex with me. I decided not to do that. Because I have nothing to hide, I decided to fight back. I produced all my records. I can demonstrate where I was in every relevant. She has never produced a single record or given a day. She said under oath, she didn't know when she had sex with me. She didn't know the year. She didn't know the month. She didn't know the season. She didn't know where. She made up stories about where, but she was foolish because she made up stories about places that I couldn't have been during the relevant time period. So my records, she said she had sex with me on an airplane, but there are records of who was on the airplane. And there's no record of me ever being on the airplane with her. She said she had sex with me in a car. There are limousine records. There are no records that document or support anything she's ever said. On day one, I said there will be no photographs. There will be no honest witnesses because you can't have photographs or witnesses to an event that didn't occur. I never met her. And her own lawyer, David Boies, said she was foolish and her first lawyers were foolish to accuse me because that undercut her truth. Her own lawyer said to a client of his that he, David Boies, knows that I never had sex with her, but he's pursuing it anyway for the money. He said on tape that she was wrong, simply wrong. One thing is clear. You're wrong, simply wrong. Yeah. He says that on tape, and yet he's still pursuing this. And we are pursuing him. I'm suing him. He's suing me. And we will have this resolved in a court of law.
And the lawsuit against Virginia, it's had hardly any coverage over here in England. I personally believe because it doesn't fit the narrative. But that, can you give us a time frame roughly of what's going to happen? And also just an explanation, you're trying to depose Virginia. You're trying to get to grill her and get those lies out. She constantly, as in the Maxwell trial, she doesn't want to take a stand. She's running from you. Why? And what are you going to do next?
Well, I want to be deposed as soon as possible. I'm being deposed right now in the lawsuit against David Boies. I've offered to be deposed in my lawsuit against Giuffre, and she has been unwilling to be deposed. We want to depose her. We want to get her under oath. I wrote an article for the Wall Street Journal in which I urged the FBI to investigate me. How many people have urged the FBI to investigate them? I have nothing to hide. I said to the FBI, come to the trial. You will hear perjury committed because I will swear under oath I never met her, and she will swear under oath she had sex with me 7 times. One of us is committing perjury, and you can't allow perjury to occur in a federal court. So I'm putting you on notice that there will be perjury. One of us should be prosecuted, convicted, and sentenced to prison. And you, the FBI, should make that determination based on all the evidence. And I'm hoping they will do that. I'm putting my own liberty on the line by challenging law enforcement to make a decision who is committing perjury. One of us is committing perjury. I know who it is. It's her. The evidence supports that. Her own lawyers essentially admit it. But so far, investigative agencies have let her off the hook. It's as if you've been victimized once, if she has in fact been victimized, if you've been victimized once, you're above the law. You're not subject to the law of sex trafficking. You're not subject to the law of perjury. You're not subject to the law of extortion. You get a free rein. You can victimize anybody else and the law won't step in.
Yeah. And so a lot of this hinders on a big piece of evidence in this whole affair is Virginia's memoir that we've already discussed.
It's the most important piece of evidence. It's the most important piece of evidence.
So we know in that memoir, like we've said, it did not accuse you of anything, despite having been encouraged to. We also know in that memoir, I've highlighted probably well over 50 contradictions now, but she specifically goes into a long, detailed account of how she was trafficked to Prince Andrew in New Mexico at the ranch. She talks about going on horse riding, spending 3 intimate days with him. Very, very detailed. She then later, under oath in the 2016 deposition, admitted that she had never met Prince Andrew in New Mexico. She then changed her story to, she had orgies in Epstein's Island with Andrew. It changed numerous times. However, the judge in Prince Andrew's case has denied Prince Andrew, has banned him essentially from using that memoir as evidence. What do you think about that?
Well, it's wrong. He obviously has the right to use that memoir. In the memoir also, she describes in detail a 3-day sexual adventure with a professor at Harvard whose first name is Stephen. I know who it is, but I can't disclose it. She's then asked under oath whether she ever had sex with this Stephen, and she says no, after describing in her memoir. Now, in her memoir, she also says she had sex with Senator George Mitchell, the man who brought about peace in Northern Ireland. She had sex with Alexandra Cousteau. She had sex with a whole bunch of other people. So it couldn't be a fictional memoir. You don't name names of real people in a fictional memoir. And she mentions me. She says she saw me talking to Jeffrey Epstein. She made up that story because she never did see me talking to Jeffrey Epstein. But in it, she explicitly denies having met me or having had sex with me. And yet now she says that she has had sex with me. I'm hoping I'll be able to use that memoir. She also tried to hide that memoir. She and her lawyers lied under oath when they were asked about emails and other things that mentioned me. And they said, no, there were no emails that mentioned me. And of course, we now know there's the smoking gun email, where it's clear that at this point in time, when the emails went out, she had never heard of me. That Sharon Church had to explain to her who I was, why I'm an important person to put in the book, because I'm famous. I represented Klaus von Bülow, so it would help her sell the book. She didn't even know who I was. And then suddenly she makes up a story that she had sex with me even before that.
It's worth noting here as well that Sharon Churcher is in the unsealed documents, a recorded telephone conversation stating quite clearly that she believes Virginia Giuffre, to be a blackmailer and to have told her false information. So that's quite important and damning as well. So obviously we've mentioned about the memoir. Inside the memoir, she also talks about foreign presidents. Now, if she was claiming this was a fictional memoir, the problem with that is she used that claim about being trafficked to foreign presidents and a PM and a string of other people in an official document, a legal document under oath when she tried to join them under. She said that she was trafficked to foreign presidents. Later in 2016, when she was grilled again, she admitted that she had never met any foreign presidents. Didn't happen. She's since not accused any prime minister. There was another prince. She went into a vague recollection of couldn't remember who he was, etc. Has since gone silent. That memoir, what do you think of that? So she has accused foreign presidents. Why aren't the press covering this? They have gone through these depositions. They've gone through the unsealed documents. And yet they're still printing the fact today. I even saw in the Times, it states in there, Virginia Giuffre claimed she was trafficked to a foreign president. It doesn't mention anything about the fact that it was proven wrong. Why is that?
Well, the press has a narrative, and they are terrified of being called victim abusers or victim skeptics or victim shamers. It's like McCarthyism. I grew up during McCarthyism, where if a person was accused by one person and had evidence that it couldn't be true, the press was terrified about printing the evidence by an accuser against somebody who, by an accused against somebody who was the accuser. The press collaborated with McCarthyism. This is sexual McCarthyism. This is a variation of that. And the press is playing an ignoble role by refusing to present both sides of the issue. Yeah. British Broadcasting has to apologize for putting me on the air, apologize, even though I disclosed fully my bias that I was falsely accused by Virginia Giuffre. They have to apologize to members of parliament because members of parliament don't want two sides of the story to be told. They don't want Ian Maxwell to be interviewed. They don't want me to be interviewed, but they do want Virginia Giuffre to be interviewed. They want her lawyer to be interviewed. They want her advocates to be interviewed. They want everybody on that side to be interviewed, but they don't want the other side to be heard. And they have the nerve to say that Virginia Giuffre says, I'm trying to silence her. I want her to speak more. The more she speaks, the more she reveals her perjury. I challenged her to accuse me outside of legal documentation, and she did on Netflix. And I am now suing her and Netflix for what she said on Netflix. So I'm not trying to silence anybody. She has silenced me. She has gotten the BBC not to interview me as the result of what the BBC did. Other stations don't want to be attacked the way the BBC was, so they're not interviewing me. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to present the truth about the false accusations against me. Let the public hear both sides of the issue.
This is my argument. The public, I'm shocked every day at how shocked the public are when I show them facts that are readily available online. That all of these depositions are readily available online. I know that the press can and do know about them, but are choosing not to.
And I'm happy to give the press the tape recordings. There are tape recordings in which her own lawyers admit that she is not telling the truth, admit that she essentially committed perjury against Leslie Wexner. Her own lawyer, Bradley Edwards, has said on television that his 11-year investigation showed that no prominent people were involved. No prominent people. In other words, she lied about Mitchell, she lied about Richardson, she lied about Ayad Barak, she lied about presidents, she lied about prime ministers, she lied about me, she lied about no prominent people were involved. This is her own lawyer. And then her other lawyer, David Boies, saying in a tape recorded conversation with me, one thing is clear, she's wrong, simply wrong. Maybe she is mistaken, maybe she was told, but one thing is clear, she's wrong, simply wrong. And David Boies has told others that he knows that she falsely accused me, and yet he continues. All of this hopefully will come out at the trial if the judges permit the manuscript to be used, the tapes to be used, and these other smoking gun incriminating statements about her credibility to be allowed to be used. I hope also that judges will allow us to call Carolyn as a witness to the trafficking and to the fact that she wasn't coerced. Look, I am not a witness. I have no idea about anything regarding Prince Andrew. I only met him 3 or 4 times. He came to my class at Harvard Law School. He actually spoke in the class. He raised his hand in the back of the classroom and talked about something involving weapons because he is a military man. He then had a dinner or lunch in his honor by the dean of the law school. But I don't know whether or not he did any more than take a photograph with her. I am not a witness to whether they went to the tramp together or got into a bathtub together or had sex. That's nothing I can testify about. I'm not here to testify for Prince Andrew. I'm here to tell everybody that nobody should believe a word that Virginia Giuffre says, that nothing out of her mouth should be believed. When you have somebody who has lied about her age, lied about Alan Gore, lied about presidents, lied about me, lied about so many things, that she's lied more often than she's told the truth. How can anybody possibly believe her? And yet she's being believed because the media presents only one side of the story, and that's a scandal.
Yeah, no, I agree. And let's be honest, the reason that the focus was upon Epstein's death, of course, the reason that a lot of the attention was moved on to Maxwell came from Virginia's accusations. That got the ball rolling. But since then, we've learned, I know that obviously the guilty verdict was passed. We've learned that at least one juror, there are more, didn't disclose the fact that they had a history of sexual abuse, that they were abused. Why is it so important that they should have disclosed that? And do you think it's going to lead to a retrial?
It should definitely lead to a retrial. You can't have a situation where a juror didn't tell the defense and the judge and the prosecution that he allegedly had a history of sexual abuse. And then he goes into the jury room and apparently says to the jurors, look, you may have some doubts and skepticism about the evidence, but I know better than you do. I've been abused. I have a history of abuse. I know how abusers behave. I can tell you that these abusers or do this and that, and the abused people testify in this way. And his testimony was obviously given more weight. He testified. He was not a juror. He was a witness. And he was a witness who was not subject to cross-examination. Apparently, he was not the only witness who used their history of alleged sexual abuse to try to influence the outcome of the case. And so I think at the very least, the judge has to have a hearing in which this witness is forced to testify under oath. Other witnesses, jurors, are forced to disclose what went on in the jury room. And then a new trial should be granted. It won't be easy to have a fair trial because there are so many people, potential jurors, who have already formed opinions about this. But at least you can have a trial with 12 jurors, none of whom have themselves been victims of the very crime that is on trial in this case.
Yeah. And so do you think that you've mentioned, obviously, that it's impossible to not have an opinion, unless you were living in the cave in Afghanistan for the past few years, about Ghislaine Maxwell. Is she going to get a fair trial? If there is a trial?
She hasn't gotten a fair trial the first time around. These jurors certainly did not present her with an opportunity to be fairly addressed and assessed by 12 impartial jurors. And the question is, can she get a fair trial second time around? First question is, will she get a new trial? I think that the law requires that she get a new trial. But if her name were Jane Smith and Jeffrey Epstein's name was John Doe, this would be an easy case. They would get a new trial. But because of who's involved, the question is, will the judges have the courage to stand up to public opinion? Look at the way the BBC bowed. Will judges have the courage to stand up to public opinion and do what the law requires, grant her a new trial in front of 12 impartial, disinterested jurors, none of whom have been victims of the crime that she is accused of?
Yeah. And going back to Prince Andrew's trial, obviously that's dominating the press at the moment. What would you do? You have probably the most experience of any lawyer in America. You're very high profile. How would you handle this case if you were representing Prince Andrew?
Well, I would first of all, right now, sue Virginia Giuffre and her lawyers for perjury and go on the offensive and make sure that she understands that her house and her wealth and all the money she's put together, the $6 to $10 million, are also at stake here. And if the jury rules against her in a counterclaim, she could lose all of her fortune. That has to be a first step. Then I would not settle the case. I think that if this case goes to trial and Virginia Giuffre is effectively cross-examined on her history of lying, the jury might very well rule in favor of the prince. Now, it depends on the judge's rulings. If the judge doesn't allow in the manuscript and doesn't allow in other evidence of her lack of credibility, the case might have to go to appeal. But I think that he is far better off litigating this case. If I were his lawyer, I would recommend that, then settling the case. Because at this point in time, a settlement would be seen essentially as an admission of guilt. No matter what the settlement says, no matter what words are used, it would be seen in that way. And, we know again that David Boies has said over and over again, all you have to do is pay her off and she'll go away. That's been her approach right from the beginning. I have him on tape saying that in front of witnesses. He said that, just get a couple of rich rabbis to give $1 million to Virginia Giuffre. She'll go back to Australia and she'll never be heard from again. That's the definition of hush money. I will not pay hush money. And I expect that the prince will not pay hush money. So we'll see. If there is a trial, I think there's a substantial chance that the jury will not believe Virginia Giuffre if they're allowed to hear all the evidence about her long history of lying, of sex trafficking, and of extortion.
And you're also actually suing Netflix, aren't you? Because
That's right.
To be fair, a lot of people have seen that documentary, Filthy Rich. And it was, you know, I've gone through some of the claims made in there, and it's just bizarre. It's a very, very biased thing. One of the people who was interviewed was Sarah Ransom. Obviously, Maria Farmer. We know she wasn't chosen as a witness in the Ghislaine Maxwell trial either. Sarah Ransom, you actually gave information to Netflix, didn't you? So obviously, we know Sarah Ransom falsely accused President Trump. I believe it was the Clintons, wasn't it?
No, but Hillary Clinton, President Trump, President Clinton, and Richard Branson. She said she had sex tapes of all of them, and that she will do everything in her power to prevent either of the two pedophiles, Trump or Hillary Clinton, from being elected president. Then she admitted she made up the whole story. She admitted she made up the whole story. She had no sex tapes. Farmer, similarly, Farmer said, she saw me walking up the stairs in Jeffrey Epstein's house miraculously months before I ever met Jeffrey Epstein. That is, she was already out of the picture. She was no longer anywhere near Jeffrey Epstein well before I ever met him. And that's all documented. There's no dispute about that. And yet they all three have the same lawyer, David Boies, whose law firm has been accused of ethical misconduct more than any prominent law firm in the history of the United States. He was involved in the Theranos case. He's been involved in the Harvey Weinstein attempt to try to pressure the New York Times reporters not to write the story. But all three of these perjuring witnesses, all three of them were represented by David Boies. And David Boies told somebody who told me that unless I withdraw my bar charges against him, I charged him with unethical conduct, he will, quote, find another girl because two are better than one. And so he found this mentally disturbed, sick woman named Sarah Ransom, who claimed she had sex with me when she was 23 years old, and that I was her lawyer while she had sex with me. I was representing her. Obviously, if I were a lawyer, there'd be a record of it. And I was never a lawyer. I don't do that kind of case. I'm not admitted to practice in New York. And so David Boies had to know that she was committing perjury, yet he submitted her affidavit. Even after she admitted that she made up all the sex tapes, Boies did not withdraw her affidavit. And I believe that's subornation of perjury. And that issue is now being litigated and will be litigated in my lawsuit against David Boies. That's my opinion. That's my belief. And the evidence will establish one way or another whether that's true. But Netflix knew about all these issues. They promised me that they would include them, and then they broke their promise, and they presented just a one-sided, favorable account of Virginia Giuffre, Sarah Ransom, and Farmer, never telling the audience that Ransom had admitted making up stories about sex tapes against Hillary Clinton. They never told that, even though they knew it because I told them that.
Yeah. And finally, we've heavily discussed the impact that the media has, the influence it has on the public, on their whole general opinion. And, it has been a very, very one-sided narrative. If you could give a message to people watching now, the general public, what would it be moving forward? How should they view this case? Skeptically.
You should be open-minded, have skepticism. Do not believe what you read in the papers or what you see on Netflix, because they're trying to sell soap. They're trying to sell products. They benefit by having salacious stories about prominent people. And then if they try to present both sides of the story, they lose their impact. It's so clear that Netflix, for example, wanted to present these three women as credible. And if they had presented the evidence they had and suppressed, then the viewers would be doubtful about their credibility. And Netflix didn't want that to happen. So they deep-sixed all the evidence that was against their credibility of their witnesses. And the impact this has on people is devastating. The impact it's had on me. I've lived an honorable life. I was honored all over the world. I got honorary degrees. I spoke at universities. I probably spoke at more universities than almost any academic. Once this accusation was made, I was canceled. I was silenced. has had a devastating impact on my family, on my wife, on my children, on my grandchildren. And it was all part of a plot. It wasn't an accident. I wasn't a victim of a hit and run. I was the victim of a planned assault, a carefully planned assault, using me and using my credibility and my reputation in an effort to obtain money. And that's why investigators have to look into this whole story. And I will not be satisfied until the people who planned this assault, who planned this attack, are held responsible.
Well, I applaud you for speaking up. But then, as you've said before, you're bound to. When I've said you're brave for speaking out before, you rightly said it's not brave. It's just telling the truth. I hope that our press and the public will start listening, because I am seeing, people are opening their eyes to the fact that there are discrepancies in the whole case, but we need to force the media to do that.
Let me make an offer. I offer anybody in the media the opportunity to sit down with me. I promise you, I will not refuse to answer a single question. I will not invoke any technical reasons for not answering the questions. I will show you the tape recordings. I will play you the tape recordings. I will show you the evidence of where I was every single day. I will give you all the information you need. Just listen to me. Just see the evidence. Just present all sides. I'm not asking you to come to any conclusion. Just see the evidence and present it to the public. Let the public decide. That's your job. Your job is not to be advocates for one side, but to present all sides of the issue. And so I offer myself to come to sit down with you and to present you with all the evidence. Please, on behalf of the public that has the right to know, take up my offer.